speaking with Kim van Bruggen, a dynamic leader in triathlon and around in the national sport community. Welcome, Kim, the CEO of Triathlon Canada. So glad to meet you and so glad you're here.
Nice to meet you as well, and thank you for having me today.
And the high performance director, many people know that have come across the Triathlon Canada high performance scene, Eugene Liang. How are you, Eugene?
Great, John. Good to see you again, and thanks for having me.
Yep, it's wonderful. And as I said, we're going to have a lot of fun today. It's nice to see the kids' bunk beds. How many are there? Just the two of them? You're not doubling
There are
up anymore?
two rambunctious little girls.
Oh, very good, very good. Well, again, we are very excited about this opportunity today. So thank you, Triathlon Canada. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Eugene. And we're going to cut away to our intro. Over to you, Lucas. Welcome back, viewers. And again, thank you to all of our YouTube subscribers and viewers. We have an exciting and interesting conversation today with Triathlon Canada, as we introduced earlier. So we're going to get right to it, Kim and Eugene. And again, this is just a really fun, organic conversation that our viewers will watch through at different times. If there's an interesting question that pops up on the YouTube feed, I have two wonderful assistants. My daughter here is monitoring the YouTube comments section for any questions. And we'll go from there. So hopefully you're good with that, guys.
Yeah.
So obviously, Kim, it's without any added description. This is unprecedented for not only the globe, but certainly for Canada. Disruption to so many people's lives, but a part of everyone's lives, if they're an athlete, is sport. And in particular, triathletes, it's a lifestyle, whether they're an age grouper or whether they're a high performance elite pro. And this has been quite a disruption. You've had a couple months to, 7 weeks to get your feet back on the ground. And some of these queries are maybe a bit repetitive that you've been through with others. So apologies for that. But maybe not all the viewers understand the challenges that a national governing body goes through with this kind of unpredictable turmoil. So, how are you guys doing? Are you doing okay?
Thanks for asking. Better now. It's certainly, I think when you're in the middle of a crisis, you're going, and then probably it was like last week maybe, or the week before, the crash hit. No, I know for me personally, I'm through that, but just going to your point about the fact that unprecedented and the changes, it's been much more than 7 weeks for us. Eugene and I will tell you that we saw this coming before it hit. And in my past life, I did crisis management and issues management. So I've been following and tracking this since I saw the very first story, which was New Year's Eve, and checking in with the International Federation in January and kind of going, okay, so what are we doing and what are we planning and how is this going? And so it's been many more weeks than just when kind of Canada decided to enact and get people home. As an organization, we actually understood and knew that things were changing, and we're making decisions and making recommendations prior to the government, because we were understanding that insurance was being affected. And that probably was the canary in the coal mine for us in terms of understanding that we needed to actually take action and get our athletes home and ask our athletes not to get on planes, and much to the chagrin of our international federation. But I'm very proud of our organization and our community as a whole for how they've been able to adapt to really trying and difficult circumstances.
Yeah. Eugene, how did that go when you, following that prediction, how did it go when you started to ask athletes to come back early? I know through my former lifetime in swimming, there were Paralympic swimming athletes at a training camp actually in Italy when Italy was just going into its challenges because they were weeks ahead of Canada. So it became quite a crisis management for them. How did you respond, as Kim mentioned, with your tracking and monitoring of the high performance athletes around the world?
I think it was as the news came in. I mean, it was changing by the moment or by the minute. But I think we actually had a plan in place, and I think our values and our mission statements drive us in a lot of the decision making we do. And I think the number one thing we always thought when we, Kim and I had started discussing this months ago, was that in the event of A, B, and C, um, these are the plans that we're going to be executing. And the number one priority was going to be athlete health, irrelevant to it was high performance or age group communities. And I think as Abu Dhabi being canceled was probably the straw that broke the camel's back, um, and then just waiting on the international federation to make a decision as we rolled in past Abu Dhabi. I think that was where Kim and I really sat down. I was flying into Australia, and we're like, look, we need to really consult here with some experts on this, and then let's make a call. And to Kim's credit and to Triathlon Canada's credit, I think we made the right call prior to Mooloolaba. And then since then, it's just been mitigating the daily changes in the news and the changing guidelines. It's always been like that. And as Kim said, it's been 7-8 weeks now of this and of the actual official lockdown or isolations. And I think in high performance, you usually have plan A, B, C, and D. And I think if anyone said they actually planned for this, they're lying. So I think basically what we had was plan A down to D, and then we realized we needed a plan E, F, G, H, and so on and so on. That's what I've been doing. It's just pivoting and adapting and trying to be as control what you can control, and that's what we've learned in high performance all the way.
Yeah, it is always a game of stick handling, isn't it? You're always managing the puck every direction it goes in. Further to that, Kim, how is your staff doing, and how have you adapted with your staff in terms of managing them as a team when you've got the majority of your on-site staff and a lower number of remote staff? How are they doing with respect to and you doing operating as a team? What changes have you had to implement in order to be cohesive?
Yeah, I think we're into a flow and a groove now. I believe it was Friday the 13th. We had a conference call with all of our PSO partners, and then we had a staff meeting after that. And we knew then that we were basically going to be collecting everything we needed to start working from home after that. So the first few days, everybody was so busy, like still like managing crisis, getting athletes back and figuring out where people were and making sure people were safe. And this was, not just the staff, but coaches, technical officials that had, where were they in the process of getting home? Um, and we always have a weekly staff meeting. We've been using Zoom for the past year with our PSO partners as a way to sort of keep engaged. So we were familiar with Zoom. We had Zoom, so we sort of transferred quite readily onto Zoom. And probably the biggest thing was the disconnection. And so as I was managing up with sort of the international federation and the board and all the rest of it, and the staff were sort of dealing with the on the ground issues, it was then keeping us connected and how to do that. And so what we put in place is we actually have a touch base point at the beginning of the week and at the end of the week, and then in the middle there, the sort of different departments, if you will, are meeting in the mornings and sort of having team meetings in the mornings. So we're staying connected that way and staying on top of what we need to do. And obviously we've gotten used to that now, and I think that's better helping not to feel disconnected from each other. And our Fridays staff calls are more the, you know, we don't necessarily always talk about work. It's like really just checking in and
It's a
making
little
sure
bit
that,
of a catch your breath time.
yeah, and sort of that high and low and trying to support each other. And so, I think early on there were some people that were maybe not doing so well, um, and checking in to make sure that just as people, they're we're doing okay. We know that because it is unprecedented times, and like Eugene, with managing like homeschooling children, so we've got staff that are single parents, staff that have kids, or whose spouse is actually working in the healthcare field, and so people are juggling a lot, as well as then trying to work, and work from home, as I'm sure your viewers can attest. So it's no different. It's no different for us.
Yeah, I can certainly tell you, Eugene, I don't know how old your children are, but I had to really reach back about 35 years to remember my molar mass equations when my son was asking me for help in grade 11 chemistry. So that was a lot of fun. So further to that, the one thing I wanted to touch base with you on was certainly, as you mentioned, insurance. Uh, as much as we all hate to talk about it, insurance is one of those things where you want to make sure that you as an organization are doing everything in compliance with what your insurer expects you to do. Uh, I guess the simple thing is Trican's insurance intact and the PSO's insurance intact? And if so, what adjustments, if any, have you had to make? And sorry for the long-winded, did you have business disruption insurance?
No, not business disruption insurance, but um, we're constantly in touch with our insurers, and as it happened, our insurance was in the process of being renewed as all of this was going on. And because we have athletes competing internationally, and in different scenarios all the time, we are in regular touch with our insurer. Even more so now, with all the various webinars that are taking place. Our business operations manager is very, very busy, trying to stay on top of all of that with the constant changes. Um, I think we know that insurance is in place for people that are uh, still involved. Obviously, we don't know. The big question mark is going to be how and where the insurance is going to fall, when things do start to open up, as they are in some provinces. And if I think that will be a question for event organizers and the provinces, if we are working together to try to formulate some kind of event somewhere. And I'm sure it will probably happen in the smaller provinces first, if they will even be able to get insurance. So, we sent out a communication at the beginning of this week, and really we're hoping that something will be able to happen, likely in some of the smaller provinces where they've got it under control. Um, but really, it's going to totally depend on what the provincial health officer says, and then insurance. So that's going to be a big question, and we just don't know.
Yeah. Uh, in terms of that, what if you had to provide instruction to the coaches that have adapted, the clubs that are members um, of the provincial sections, and registrants, coaches that are registrant members of Trican? What instructions have you had to give them in order to adhere to this new environment of uh, online coaching or virtual coaching? Obviously, I would assume as a NSO, you're a signatory to the rule of two and respect in sport and safe sport. So I'm just wondering, have you had to provide any special instructions to the clubs or coaches in order to ensure that coaches that are working with minors, of course, that they're adhering to that?
Well, I think
Well,
we're. Well, sorry, go, Kim.
I was just going to say, prior to COVID, we had just launched a coaching portal, because Triathlon Canada had not ever had a place where we could make sure that coaches had their respect training and had criminal background checks and all the rest of it. So that was happening prior to COVID, and so really our work is going to be focusing on making sure that coaches are aware that that's there and to utilize their time to get registered and get the basics sort of done, so that we can actually have that database and list to be able to provide those resources to the coaches. So that was happening just before COVID hit, and that's not going to change. But I'll let Eugene speak to the specifics.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty simple scenario we're in right now, just because all the provinces started to lock down anyways. So the whole reality around coaching or the daily training environment was dictated by the provincial municipal guidelines. So there was nothing really in terms of providing guidance around the safe sport aspects or their coaching environment or what could happen, because the government has already dictated what could happen. Right now, though, what we're doing is working with Sport Canada and COC, OTP, and we're working towards a return to play guideline policy that is going to provide some of those guidelines, right? And I think it's not just coaching that's being affected by that, because obviously the rule of two is a pretty significant piece that is impacted by COVID. But I think things like anti-doping protocols are significantly affected. Things like being on deck for CSCTA for swimming, right? Like a lot of these things that we kind of assumed was the norm and the policies were created to affect the norm now have to be reviewed and looked at in order to affect the new norm. I don't think anyone has the right answers for that, because I think by the time you put a guideline out, you have no idea if it's going to affect Manitoba or Winnipeg differently than Regina, Saskatoon, or Montreal. So I think everyone's a bit in a holding pattern. But the principles of say anti-doping or say sport and all that are still being held to the highest level within the confines of what we're in. So.
Okay. So you're pretty confident that your coaches understand that when they are doing virtual coaching or something like that, if there's minors involved, that they are adhering to the rule of two.
For sure. I mean,
process.
Yeah, and that's a two-pronged effect, right? Our coaches, obviously when Kim and I came on board, that was the number one thing we were looking towards was registration of coaching. And now that we've, started to tackle that, it is there is quality assurance, let's say, with CAC, right? With the requirements there, and then obviously with our new requirements. And then it's something that Kim and I are passionate about, and it's, we ensure that to our best of our abilities that all vulnerable communities are protected.
Yeah, good. Have you got any additional information? Of course, as recently as today, Canadian Paralympic and COC announced that the government of Canada was going to be supporting sport with $72 million in funding. What the details and parameters of that, of course, we don't know. But inclusive of that, Kim, your communication with your Sport Canada delegates and liaison, is Trican's funding in effect secure moving forward?
Yes, that was a big part of the first part of the crisis, was making sure that our funding was secure. So after we made sure that the athletes were safe, the next I pivoted to, is the funding safe, and where are we at there? And I have to give a huge shout out to Sport Canada. I can't tell you how responsive and quick for bureaucracy that is not necessarily known for pivoting on a dime. Our Sport Canada rep has been amazing. The Sport Canada staff, up to the Director General, Vicky Walker, amazing. And immediately reaching out and letting us know on a call that we had with COC, and it included the Heritage Minister's staff. First thing they let us know was that our core funding and the athlete assistance funding was secure and was not going to change. And so that was a really big thing for all of us as an organization, and knowing that the athletes weren't going to be affected with their AAP funding. And then it was ongoing conversations about, okay, so what is being affected and what is the impact? And there are much more high profile stories that have been out there about world championships for figure skating that were just about to happen, or the tennis, like the Rogers Cup, and where they get millions of dollars normally from those events. And so there's no doubt that all of us are being impacted. For those of us that are smaller sports, obviously membership revenue, it went from everybody was tracking really well and looking like it was going to be a great season. We were going to be hosting the grand final in Edmonton. We had the ITU Montreal. We had the World Para series. Like it was tracking very, very well. And literally, as this happened, it was like it went to zero.
Yeah.
And so, of course, it's going to have an impact. Absolutely. And
So do you foresee that the greater impact, and as you know, I did speak with Tri Ontario about 5 weeks ago. Certainly their concerns around funding were the ability to have revenue generation through the one-day memberships of athletes that would be signing up through races. And of course, that's at zero at the moment. So what is your what strategies are you working on with the provincial sections to assist them, given that the majority of their funding is through those memberships?
Well, we've been working with them since that Friday, March the 13th. We were meeting weekly, and just recently have just gone to now where we're meeting every 2 weeks as a group. And one of the things that we started doing in March was innovative thinking. What can we do? What can this look like? How do we think outside the box? One of the outside the box thinking was waiving fees, membership fees. Some provinces, felt like that might be an idea worth looking at. Other provinces, absolutely not, because they wouldn't survive. Like they wouldn't be here next year if they did that. So, which is fair enough. But what we did, knowing and created a budget based on the fact that the membership fees had dried up, is just opened it up and said, we'll waive our Triathlon Canada membership fee, and that will hopefully help alleviate some burden. And we also partnered with Full Gas to offer sort of a 4-week free series. And again, just to get people engaged and sort of back into the mode of training and the system, if you will, and something a little bit different. So those are some of the things we're doing. We're looking at other ways to be more efficient. So one of the standing items on our agenda, which we haven't quite got to, it's sort of there in the periphery, but it's around future proofing. And so what will it look like in the future? So we're talking about things like that. How can we be more efficient? How can we be more efficient with the funds that we do have, with the people, and with how we're operating? So those are some of the ideas, but we're really looking at sort of the short term, the mid, and then the long range as well.
Okay. And Eugene, with these challenges, obviously you've had in your oversight of the National Training Center located in Victoria, as well as bringing athletes back that may be engaged in international training. What have you had to do, obviously, and what's changed with their direct impact for certainly the stable of athletes that are in Victoria?
I think it's similar to what I had stated earlier. I think it's more around planning starting about now and then moving into 2021. I think when we first brought everyone home, there was this, I guess, optimism around how long we were going to be locked down. The games was still, planned, but I think in the last few weeks things have changed dramatically with the Olympic Games being postponed, the lockdowns happening across the world, the airline industry tanking significantly, and then competitions being canceled or postponed. And I think those things didn't really happen on the first 2 weeks. So the first 2 weeks was quite easy. It was just bring them home, just stay safe, everyone, listen to your government. And then I think now we've been sort of working with our stakeholders on figuring out, one, the legal ramifications around, say, Olympic selection and team selection and AAP. And luckily we have, the backing of Sport Canada and COC and OTP that help us with that significantly. I think the challenges we're facing now in the next couple of months is twofold. One is obviously their motivation. I think athletes are athletes; they want to compete, and I think trying to figure out how that's going to look in the absence of any foreseeable events is going to be the tough one. And then I think the other one that we probably this generation is experiencing first time ever is this whole I guess a global situation with the accessibility of social media. I think what's happening now is, and I think it's probably fair to say, is that everyone's tracking and seeing what everyone else is doing. And I think that adds a significant amount of anxiety to everybody. I would say we're probably in the middle of the spectrum where we have some freedoms, or in Canada, and then you have, say, Italy and Spain that was in complete lockdown, and then you have some countries like Sweden that's taken that hybrid approach where they've had no lockdowns. They kind of lock down the elderly and the young, and then you have America, it's in a different ballpark, and then you have what in Asia was in a completely different situation. So I think being a global sport, it was easy to take care of the pandemic as a whole, but I think what we're starting to see now is how the athletes are managing now with the games being canceled, being extended another 14 months, and then obviously trying to control themselves or control their ambitions within the confines of a haves and have-nots society, right?
Yeah, you certainly will have those athletes that have had to overcome the immediate initial, let's call it, disappointment, given they perceived a level of crisis disruption. And then there may have even been some athletes that, for example, in my interview with Dominika Jamnicki, she actually really felt struggled, but felt positive that for her, having more time to prepare in her goals was a positive.
Yeah. And it's the messaging we've been giving everyone, right? Like, we've always had an 8-year plan to Paris 2024 and then on to 2028 in LA. And the messaging has always been, control what you can control. And there's always an opportunity in every setback, right? And the opportunity for us is we're a young team. Even our top elites, our top ones are 27, 28 years old. And the average age for an Olympic medal is 31 years old, right? So it actually, we've marked it out, and we are always looking at Tokyo as a canary in the coal mine for us, whereas Paris was always going to be a real metric of the success of the culture we're trying to, and the plan that we're trying to put in place. So it's 14 months isn't that big of a deal to us. I mean, obviously we have to be realistic. There are some other athletes who had this on their marker, right? Individual older elite athletes in all sport. But I think for us as a nation, there's always going to be opportunity, and I think we're looking at this as positively as we can.
What challenges do you foresee that you've had to make with respect to the selection criteria moving forward?
It's more around just legal, right? I mean, for me, I'm always process driven. So it's always ensuring that we run it through all of our legal counsel and COC. But it's the biggest challenge is the waiting game. Because as of even today, May 8th, the original Olympic qualification period hasn't ended yet. So as written, the Olympics nomination and Paralympic nomination policies are standing as is, as recommended by the legal counsel. But I mean, you've obviously worked in sport for many years. You understand that that's just, a process that we have to do. And then obviously we inform the affected people this is what's happening, but we're trying to communicate to them as effectively as we can with the information that's ruling, without any confirmation of what events are going to be part of the qualification period. We really can't make any changes to that nomination criteria, because in the event, let's just say there are races in the fall, then that's when I can start to adapt or adjust and make amendments. But we've done we've done all the legal amendments we need for now, and then any weekly changes I've been communicating to the athletes. Same thing with Sport Canada AAP. We're kind of not unique. I guess unique to us is our carding cycle is January to December. We have some other sports that are July to July or April to April or whatever. And I think because of the way we have situated our carding cycle, it actually buys a significant amount of time. We actually don't need to adjust until we have all the information. Whereas I know some other sports are scrambling quite significantly to figure out their AAP.
It certainly is a challenge, though, even though my background may help me or assist me with understanding it. There's a lot of times our viewers don't understand that, Eugene. So don't, you should give yourself a pat on the back and not overlook the type of challenges that do occur with that, because it creates a domino effect.
It's huge.
You are in a position of predicting the unpredictable of what events do I identify for a new selection criteria for not knowing when that deadline is and what the events are. And that's the domino effect that, again, I wanted to have you pat yourself on the back for, because a lot of times the viewers don't understand that, and they don't understand the challenges that the governing body does go through when you're dealing with such a disruptive environment. So my hat's off to you, and I encourage you. I know that the athletes, the biggest thing they'll ask for is they'll want certainty, and just keep that open line of communication with them, because they'll all think they have and want to have that goal, and they all have a shot to qualify. And so, of course, they're going to want to know as soon as you have those things identified.
For sure.
Yeah. Continuing on, this is a great segue to find out a little bit about, Kim, you released your communication that the sport may open up at different rates across the country. And of course, many of the sports have already sort of predicted that, seen that. OTP has been working on a return to play type plan. The Australian Institute of Sport has outlined their strategy and what they're going to do. We're very large geographically. And as an example, you've got PEI that locked down a bridge and one case, and they may be able to open far earlier. Now, granted, it's a smaller province. It's not like Ontario or Quebec or BC or Alberta. But your communication alluded to, if I interpreted it right, you want everyone to be patient, understand that things may open at a different rate, but you also want to encourage people to compete in their own provinces when things are opening at the different rates. Did you want to expand on that at all a little more?
Sure. So in our meetings with the provinces that we've been having, the regular meetings that we've been having, we've been monitoring sort of, everybody does a roundtable from east to west or west to east, to just sort of say where are things at, and depending on where we were in the crisis, there was people not so
cherish that, Eugene, because my 14-year-old daughter,
that doesn't normally happen at our meetings,
doesn't want to give her daddy a hug anymore. So you got to cherish those.
I heard that.
Time.
I'm milking it up. Milking it up.
Yeah.
Sorry for that interruption.
No. That's what family's about. So that's wonderful.
Yeah. But so depending on where we were in the crisis, we had some provinces that were not so hopeful early on, and we had other provinces that were very, very hopeful early on, and now we've kind of flopped, flipped or flopped, and so it's been interesting to see how that's evolved and changed as our meetings have been. So at our last meeting, it was very, very clear to us that for some of the smaller provinces, as you mentioned, PEI Newfoundland, possibly Saskatchewan. They're looking at the fact that they actually might be able to have a season or a race or two. Now, how and what exactly those races would look like, but as our executive director from Newfoundland said, he goes, we don't necessarily have 500 people at our races anyways. So if we're being innovative and creative, what could this look like? So obviously that's very, very different than say Ontario, Quebec, or BC. It doesn't mean that those provinces are not still working on return to play. But given the provincial health officers from those provinces stating, for example, in BC, there won't be any gatherings over 50 people this summer, period. So BC is going to be in a very different boat, say, than Saskatchewan or maybe some of our Atlantic provinces. So in a way, in an ironic kind of way, it might be some of our smaller provinces where they'll be able to offer some races where others will not. But then that led to the conversation changing to, well, okay, but if you live in New Brunswick, then you might go, hey, like I want to hop over and go and do this race. And I think that was where we had to make sure that we shared the communication that it's not likely that we're going to be province hopping to events. And in fact, we don't want people, like, in order for PEI or Newfoundland or Saskatchewan's event to go off and be successful, it's probably going to mean that it has to be smaller and it has to be local. And we're providing guidelines that we have received from the ITU to all of the provinces so that they can start to think about what that could look like. But they're all in different stages of what their reality is going to be. And because things change so quickly, we honestly don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly very, very difficult for any of them to be able to predict. Eugene, a couple of things I want to touch base as we were speaking about some of the high performance area. Um, you know, have you seen an increase of what the coaches are asking for in terms of education support, professional development support? They've got a lot more, to some degree, time on their hands because they're not in-person active coaching as much. At least I haven't heard as many coaches doing a 4 hour Zoom call with an athlete on a 4 hour bike ride or anything like that. Or, certainly some coaches are working out with their athletes. A couple have told me they're getting in great shape, so they're enjoying that. But what have you seen from the standpoint of owning and operating NCCP and ensuring that you can continue to educate and support the coaches across the country?
Well, luckily, right before this pandemic hit, we released our new coaching model and our coaching pathway. And I would say the first half of that pathway is actually multi-sport module based and online based. So I think we were set up quite well for it. And I don't have the correct stats right on me, but last time we just talked with CAC, which is 2 weeks ago on the Friday, I know that they've seen an increase in uptake on the online modules for multisport, and I think those were the easiest ones for them to pump out there. And I know the provinces have been putting a lot of those modules online and increasing the frequency. And I would say that's, the messaging has been gone out to the coaches like, look, this is a time where you can't be on your daily training environment. Professional development should be your number one priority. And so I know a lot of coaches have started taking, university courses that they, didn't have time for before, or professional development courses. And I do know that within the community, there is a significant uptake on the multi-sport modules that are actually part of our pathway now.
Okay, great. You seeing good feedback from the coaches on that so far?
Yeah, I mean, we really had to revamp the pathway, so it's only been a few months. I would say the feedback has been been positive towards the beginning side of the pathway. We have yet to see how that plays out for the high performance pathway side because it's still probably about 6 to 8 months away, even with the first group of people that get through the first pathway as they move in the second part. I would say there was overwhelming support for some of the agreements we put in place with CAC in terms of grandfathering some of the high performance coaches into the new pathway, recognizing the work they've done, ensuring that our provincial coaches were all put through the system as quick as they could to ensure that Canada Summer Games qualifications and there at least some of the hard yards they've done in the previous years when we had to put the coaching program on hiatus was actually recognized. And I think that was definitely some positive for them. But
Okay.
we're still waiting to see how this next cycle of the pathway goes.
Yeah. That's a good segue into my question on Canada Games,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that obviously as an NSO, you're greatly influenced in working with the Games Committee on technical
Yep.
packages, and the provinces have to manage their selection criteria accordingly. Obviously, there was a predicted test event in the province of
Yep.
Ontario scheduled. Do you have any semblance of what will occur potentially with either a test event and then what adjustments will have to be made going into 2021 on a double year where we're going to have an Olympic Games and a Canada Games, hopefully, of
Yeah.
course.
I think I'm pretty confident with the qualification criteria we put into the Canada Games Committee in terms of how our eligibility works for Canada Games. It's been a couple of years and we've really had our hands on in creating a new format to reflect the competition demands that we're seeing internationally. So this year, we've gone to a super sprint and a sprint and a relay. So there's three medals, and obviously as our sport, we're given three medal chances, right? So we've figured out how to work those three medal events in. And then I think for the actual event itself, we're operating on the fact that it's going to happen. And I don't think there's going to be any redundancies in terms of the type of athletes that are going to be going to the games or Canada Summer Games. But I think what we're going to, the intent of the Canada Summer Games on the go forward is to actually to make it a significant or a valid pathway event. I think before we've seen, very early maturing juniors dominate that race. And I think the overwhelming feedback from the PSOs, which we did some calls last year and the year before, was they do see significance in the Canada Summer Games. They do see there's some funding ties to it. And so our job was to ensure that those factors are taken into consideration, but to ensure that the event is a pathway event as opposed to just a one-off. And their concern has always been that if there's a routing of Canada Summer Games with early maturing juniors, then they've seen a huge attrition, which we see with any of these young athletes, that they don't move on to the sport. So what we've done is move some of the ages up a bit to close that gap in the U23. And we created some eligibility around restrictions around that. So a very early maturing junior that is already, scoring significant points at the I2 level shouldn't be racing at the Canada Summer Games level. It should be targeting more around the late developing athletes.
Right.
So that's kind of where we're going with it. As for the test event, it's unfortunate. I know Phil in Ontario worked significantly on that event and that location. It was a great event. I think it was going to be excellent to have a test event within our development series. It's unfortunate it's been canceled, but for all intents and purposes, it's going to run next year, and I think it's going to be a great event based on what we know of the site.
Right. So continuing with that, I appreciate you identifying a bit of that gap that you've worked on between
Mm-hmm.
those developing athletes that might be a little bit later maturing, need a little bit more time. Are you looking at any other strategies? And again, I'm deliberately trying to not avoid, but I'm trying to get beyond just the COVID-19
Yeah.
pandemic elements because it's been on everybody's mind. But
Yeah.
at some point, we'll exit this to some
Totally.
degree, and it's important that we stay focused on the future, not just the now. And so that's why some of these questions came up. So they're not meant to challenge you guys or anything like that.
No,
So
it's great.
I appreciate you being willing to entertain it. So have you looked at a little bit of that gap analysis and looking at how Canada Games fits in and what strategies can continue to be employed by Triathlon Canada going into 2024 and where you want to be.
Yeah. The number one, I mean, the number one thread, or you want to call it, or foundation that I believe in high performance, and through the 20 years I've worked in high performance, is competitive hardiness. You can see that in our high performance plan. I strongly believe in competition, and I strongly believe that if you don't dumb it down for people, or you don't create an easy path for them, that everyone who's willing to work for it is going to rise to the top. And you see it across the board. That's what separates great from good. And so in looking at development in our sport, I would say we were lacking that. We were lacking, for lack of a better word, a winning culture. And I don't think it's anyone's fault per se, but I think it's a matter of not knowing what you don't know what you don't know. So, you were in swimming Canada with me as well. I think there was a big shift in the culture post 2012. And I think part of that was obviously structure, organizational excellence and all that. But I think it was a belief system where you didn't know, you thought what was good, and then you start to expose yourself to great. And I think what happens is when you expose yourself to great, you end up you will for sure, you start to lose people, which is a reality, but you also gain people. And I think we're in that point right now where we are losing people, which is a natural occurrence because great is not attainable by everyone. But then you actually see who's actually going to rise to the top. So I think what we're going to do we are doing in the next couple months and moving to 2024 and 2028 is increasing that competition, whether it's competition on the field of play or competition in terms of standards and protocols and compliance, and a mental mindset around what is considered to be mediocre or okay or good enough. And I think everyone talks about what is success, right? To me, success is not about winning medals. It's achieving all that you can that is determined to win the medal. If you can achieve all that and you don't win a medal, it is what it is. You can't control winning a medal, but you can control the process leading up to it. And I think that's so hard for people because I think if I were to ask, I think we happened this in swimming. I think we did this in one of those team meetings. You ask everyone, if I were to poll the 150 ICC card holders we have, right, for elite ITU, I would say how many people want to win an Olympic medal or be a part of the Olympic Games? I would say 99% of them would say that. They would say, put their hand up. And then the question isn't what you want. The question is, how are you going to do it? And I think that's the biggest change that we're working on is a lot of people want to win an Olympic medal, but they don't know how to do it. And the problem is when you tell them how it actually is going to occur, very few people want to take a bite of that sandwich because it's not always attractive. It's not always easy. It's a significant amount of accountability. It is hard. And
performance costs a lot of money too.
And performance costs a lot of money. And it's not just money, it costs a lot of resources, time, family, relationships, all these things. And I believe it's not a win at all cost mentality, but it's win at what cost. And I think as long as you lay out the cost to people and they realize this is the cost, and I mean, it's not just money, you can create a culture that is going to buy into that. And I think that's where we are in that transition. I would say we're moving in the right direction. We have, some great staff, great coaches. But I think if you're talking about the pathway towards that, it is creating more competitive environments that actually recreate the demands of competition. And I don't mean just run, bike, and swim. It means the coaching environment, the training environment, the soft skills, the accountability, the professionalism, the understanding of sponsorship, your requirements to your NSO, Sport Canada, anti-doping, everything. And I think we didn't know what we don't know. And I guess my role has been always to provide people with this is what it actually takes to win. It's not my opinion. It's not a standard that I create. It's a standard that the international community has created, and it's my job to not filter that to you. Yeah.
Do you feel that part of the gap is potentially that the sport hasn't been able to get enough athletes racing together that are of like competencies at those developmental levels? I'm just curious of
I would say it's twofold. I would say yes, you're right, absolutely. It's a numbers game. We don't have enough numbers. That's that's a Kim and I discussion and a community discussion we have all the time. The sport itself came from a different route, right? Swimming, cycling, athletics comes from a completely different route of going to the Olympic Games, and we went from middle-aged people down to the 17 to 29-year-old Olympic profile, whereas most sports go from 5-year-olds into a pathway up. And I think that is always going to be something that is unique to us. Whether that's a curse or a benefit is still to be determined, as long as we manipulate it the proper way. But I think, I think it's one, the numbers game, and the other one is, again, going back to, and I said this when we first came in, we bumped into a medal with someone as excellent as Simon. Like, Simon was a spectacular athlete in a, for lack of a better word, in a new and fresh environment. What you want to see is repeat winners in an old ingrained society or culture of sport. So you look at someone like, Phelps, who is a repeat medalist, or Usain Bolt in athletics, or you look at a Rhodesia, or the top marathoners in the world. Those are cycles of excellence. That's what we're looking for. We can't continue to look for one Simon Whitfield. And I think that's the difference between a high performance culture and just like you're always constantly looking for 6 Simons, right? You're looking for that's what we want. We cannot keep milking the same cow. So, and I think that's what the goal is. I don't think we have a lack of talent. I think we have to find the talent, but I think it's out there, and I think we just have to be novel. I think everyone is part of winning is to think laterally, right? You have to think outside the box.
Well, maybe let's cross our fingers that some of the 72 million that however much of the pie gets filtered towards Triathlon Canada, it can be utilized in ways that are going to augment not just the organization as a whole and administratively, but it can help augment it and improve it technically towards performance development and high performance. I think the two are still a little bit different. You've been very good, Eugene, at identifying performance development and high performance are still two different things. And I think sometimes the wonderful word high performance gets sloshed around a little bit in fluid ways, but it's very, very different. I'm going to ask some of my assistants, do we have any questions that have popped up here, young Jedi? I wouldn't be able to do this show if it weren't for tomorrow is his 17th birthday. So for all the viewers out there that when he's e-training, make sure you say happy birthday to young Lucas Videka. He's an aspiring, budding young triathlete as well. Do we have any questions?
We do. So from David Hopton.
Okay.
Will Canada Summer Games be 16 to 19 or 16 to 20?
Okay, David Hopton, an up-and-coming coach out of Hamilton. Will Canada Games be 16
to 19 or 16 to 20?
Yeah, so 16 to 19 or
we raised it to 20.
You raised it to 20. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there you
and
go.
Just to answer that question is the reason why usually people say this is what we did, but they want to know why we did it. It's to reflect the demographic we have in the sport. It's to allow for athletes that are late bloomers, right? I mean, I think what we always track athletes, but I think if we look at on track, use the swimming, for example, on track timing captures a percentage, but you also want to ensure that you have an ability to capture the outliers. And if we didn't allow for that, we wouldn't capture some of those medalists you see in the past games, like a Kylie Moss or a Hillary Caldwell, or even a Penny Alexiak were not necessarily on track until they were around 17 years old. So
did you, in your discussions with the province, did you discuss with them any thoughts around age staggering and the development between males and females? Was it a discussion or was it basically?
No, it's a discussion with the Canada Summer Games. I think, you can talk to the provinces about this. This was the first time we have, and from what I heard, I have no idea. I only just work within the way I process I work, but we presented the Canada Summer Games package to all the provinces, asked for feedback, and then we discussed it. And obviously, it had to be consensus or a majority. We couldn't please everyone, right? There are some provinces who wanted to keep it at 16 and 19. Some people want to go down to 15. But I think overwhelmingly, I think the provinces are they're aware. They're in charge of development. They're aware that there's a huge attrition of triathletes from 20 to 23, and it's usually right after the games. So I think for us on the long term sort of global picture is how do we keep those kids in the game? For me, that's really important, because if you can give a slow growing 20-year-old a chance one more year, and you never know what's going to happen. Like I'm all about opportunity. So if I can get two kids to stay in sport, and they're going to drop 15% of their run times and swim times within that year, that puts them back in the game, right? But if they don't give them that opportunity, then we're pretty much hooped. So, and we don't really have a lot of eggs to throw against the wall. Do you know what I mean? So the more eggs, the better.
That's a bit of a segue as we get closer to wrapping things up. Another question. Okay, well, let's hit that question.
Just a sec.
Oh,
I can't memorize that.
yeah, it's a very long question, so get ready.
Ooh.
Okay.
Oh,
From
geez.
Barry Shepley. With
Oh,
the
hi, Barry.
limitation,
Did you get that, or you want me to sort of repeat
Yes,
it?
paraphrase it for me. I heard online biking.
Okay, so basically, Barry is wondering about getting your thoughts, I think, overall from the entire organization on e-bike racing, and so I'll read it to you. With the limitation to get competitive experiences going,
Yeah.
your thoughts on using online bike racing to let athletes challenge each other and break up boredom.
Yeah. Okay, so usually I try to break down questions into like sort of the 5 keywords, right? So it's what and how. So what is online biking, right? To me, online biking is a tool just like anything else in high performance. I think it needs to be used strategically, and it can't be used as a solution or a hammer for everything. There's obviously inherent issues with it in terms of whether it's Zwift or full gas or anything, whether it's the body mass issue or the height issue. That I think there's a whole whack of 50 kilo, 120 centimeter riders out there right now in
There's
H3
a
triathlons.
there's a plethora of issues. You can
There's a whole bunch of 9-year-olds racing.
You can
We're putting out
ride your
400 watts.
riding that can happen.
Exactly. So I think it is great for competitive competition. I think it's important that we actually continue to use competitive environments. But I think in terms of high performance, and I'm only speaking on the high performance side, we just have to be weary of what it actually does, right? And why we're using it. And if we want to use it to stroke competitive juices, I think it's great. I think if we're going to use it to replace a reflection of what high performance is, I think then we need to be extremely careful on how we do that. And I think the other one is you have to ask why. Like, I think a lot of people are racing these Zwift online races and so forth because they're bored. But ultimately, I think if you're looking at high performance, my job is to pull everyone's reins back sometimes and release them when they're ready. And I think the game is to be ready to win a medal at Tokyo and Paris and some world championships in between. So I think you'll see some of these kids who are completely winning and dominating Zwift May 8th when the games are not going to be happening for 14 months. And my question is, what's the point, right? If it's boredom, there's a lot of ways to, there's a lot of other things in my opinion, that our athletes are missing as opposed to wattage. So example, I've communicated this to the coaches, is competition or closing those gaps can mean learning, bike handling skills, or how to, in a parking lot with nobody around and learning, all those skills that, are really actually more important sometimes than trying to throw down 450 watts.
Well, what up when you do it twice?
For sure. And I think they can spend those hours riding on an online trainer for sure. And I think it's great for fitness. But I mean, the other one is I've asked him, because he was ruthless, and those tactics that some of our athletes don't have by grinding on his Zwift, they're not going to have those skills. Like why are the Brownlees so dominant in that era before 2016? Why is Mola and Louis that's so good? Why did Tyler win? How did Tyler win the Tokyo Test event? When the fact that he probably doesn't have the highest power profile, like those are the things that I want our athletes and our coaches to start to look at, right? I think we've come from this sort of idea that there's a magic bullet for everything. There isn't. Like, it's tenacity, and tenacity can't be taught. It can be learned.
Yes, absolutely. So. Kim, given all of these things that we've talked about, and still in the theme of moving forward, beyond here, and Eugene's been great at speaking about 2024 and 2028, a very warm and fuzzy and fluffy question: what is your vision of Triathlon Canada? Where do you want it to be by 2024 and 2028? What's your vision?
I want us to be the top performing national sport organization in Canada. I want us to lead the charge around governance and excellence. One of the things that I said early on was you can't inspire excellence if you don't demonstrate it organizationally. So Eugene and I working together as a team, it has to be, our Olympics is, excellence around the boardroom table, excellence around, the meeting room tables, the policies, the execution of the role that we're playing around governance, putting in places the process and procedures so that we can develop the athletes from that grassroots on up, and making sure that there is a strong pathway. So that's ensuring that we have the coaching platform in place, and that we're encouraging those, the younger generation of coaches coming up. And so it's not just, Eugene's talked a lot about the culture of excellence and a high performance culture, but we need to demonstrate that at all levels of our organization and up and down the spectrum, from the grassroots right up to the from the provinces right on up to the national level. And I think for me, having a very strong functioning organization, and when I say organization, I don't just mean Triathlon Canada, I mean all of us in the global spectrum here. We're all part of the sport universe, if you will, and the provincial sport organizations are just as much a part of that. And getting back to the pandemic, that's the one thing that this has shown us, is that we are all very much in this together. And if there is a silver lining, and that is, it's being able to continue to work closely together for the benefit of the whole. And I think that's what I really hope that we end up with coming out of this and well into 2024, that we leave. That Eugene and I leave the organization much better than when we found it, but also that whoever picks up the reins from us, it's sustainable well into the future.
That's fantastic. Just going to ask you one more time. Any other questions?
Nope.
No? Okay, that's great. Well, again, guys, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. I know you've had a very, very busy 4 months, and especially through this crisis management, taking time out of your day to meet with me, and know that this has been, I think, a great benefit to the viewers and subscribers, for all of them that are watching. Again, this will be posted almost immediately to YouTube so that others get to see it. I would ask you to remain on the line, but we're going to wrap things up. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you to Triathlon Canada. Kim Van Bruggen, wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much. Eugene, good to see you again. Glad you got a kiss on the head from the little one. I don't get those anymore, so cherish them.
I will.
And thank you very much to all of our viewers and subscribers. And one last announcement. We've got a great show next Wednesday where we'll have Craig Taylor online live with Liam Donnelly. So we'll get insight into his development, and he'll get a chance to send messages around what he wants to see more of as he continues to move forward. And I'm sure he's got his sights set on some high performance too. So thank you, and thank you, viewers, for joining us on Forging Innovation Together. Thanks very much, and see you on Wednesday next week at 4 p.m.
Great. Thanks, John. Take care.
All right.
Thank you.
So, Kim, you can stay on the line if you want.
Okay.